Assalamu alaikum, friends and other YouTubers. My name is Anwar Shaik. I've had an interest in the deen of Islam since I was a very, very young man. I remember my eldest brother, he bought a set of hadith books called Al-Hadith. I think I might still have a set of Al-Hadith. When I was, I think, in high school. And I've been reading hadith books since the age probably of 15 or 16 and found the stories fascinating. Later on in my life, I became very seriously interested in the deen. Besides my secular education, which I pursued a degree, a bachelor's degree in science. Eventually, I earned a master's degree in science in research. And then about 6 years ago, I completed a doctorate in research also in education. And all along, since my young days, I've been taking a keen interest. I've traveled to the Middle East. I spent 2 years in Egypt, registered at the Al-Azhar Institute, where I tried to seek some more understanding and knowledge of the language of Arabic, as well as of the general ethos and understanding of Islam. And it brought me to where I am today, still retaining that interest, but with some lessons that I've learned over the years. Now, I want to share these lessons with you because I'm serious about the deen of Islam, and I'm very serious about my family. I'm very serious about society. I'm serious about being a benefit to my fellow human beings on this earth. I do realize that my life will not go on forever, and any day Almighty Allah could decide that my time is up. And I sincerely feel that a life of 40 or 50 years spent in reading and seeking a proper understanding of the deen by Allah should result in some sort of benefit to my fellow human beings. And that is why I've made a YouTube channel, this channel, where I share the findings of my research. But unfortunately, the research findings in the end are not findings that will be acceptable to you all. And there's a problem in that much of the findings that I've made, especially in the past 10 years of my research, of my studies, of my life, in seeking a true understanding of the deen and of the way, I have come to some very, very to some conclusions that might be regarded as contentious. And I'm sharing it with you regardless, because it fits in the fact that the conclusions that the education, the research that I've conducted has brought me to contentious conclusions is not an unexpected or an abnormal finding, because it fits in with a general idea that the majority of people will forever oppose and have a skeptical stance towards the truth, because the majority of people are conditioned. They are more comfortable with following the status quo, following authority, following the safety of numbers, following what people tell them to do, than to go on the risky path of self-discovery, of trying to use their own intellect, of taking the risk of being ostracized and excommunicated by their people. And I'm prepared to take that risk, because in my reading of the deen, in my studies of the Qur'an, I find that the very people that have been the historical champions of truth are the people that had to face the wrath, the rejection, the opposition, the antipathy, or the skepticism of their own people. And so I feel okay in meeting that kind of opposition, whilst my focus and my dedication is to be faithful to the one thing I know is divine, and that is the supreme and noble book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Al-Qur'an. So I would like to then share with you a lifetime, and especially the past 10 years, but not just based on the past 10 years, also based on the previous life of reading hadiths, probably reading thousands and thousands of hadith and trying to live by these hadiths, trying to shape my understanding by these hadiths. And so I'm going to share with you my findings at the end of this prolonged period. Now, keep in mind that for the past 7 to 10 years, I've been focusing on understanding the Qur'an. And so I've drawn clear distinctions between what the Qur'an, the ethos, the idea, the message that is coming out of the pages of the Qur'an, and the message, the ethos, the understanding that comes out of the pages or the tradition. And I'm going to go through 8 of those differences with you, and I hope you will stay with me throughout, because these are all 8 critical differences. And let me look at the first one firstly. In the first major difference that all my learning and all my research has shown me is that when it comes to the religion of the priests, which is the religion of hadiths, everything is unlawful except what is declared lawful by the priestly authorities. So every town, every country, probably wherever you stay, there is an authority of Muslim jurisprudence or priests. And they are the ones that really answer the question of what is lawful and what is unlawful. And still even today, people ask me, what is your opinion on fasting, or what is your opinion on salah? And I can't understand how people cannot just, there is a book, there is a directory that contains a series of opinions. It is called the Qur'an. And all we have to do is just go there. And the Qur'an, on the other hand, as opposed to the priestly Islam, states that everything is lawful except what is pointed out as unlawful in the Qur'an. That is my finding. It is unambiguously so that the Qur'an states in no uncertain terms that everything is lawful except that which has distinctly been declared unlawful, especially when it comes to food, to any other voluntary human practice. The difference, of course, is with the Islam that we have erroneously adopted, that people are assuming to be Islam, is an Islam where the priests must decide what is lawful. And if you buy anything from the shop, if you buy a bottle of drinking water, you look on there for a sign that says lawful, whereas the reverse should be the case. You see, we should be declaring unlawful if bottled water is not lawful. And that goes against the ethos of the Quran. Everything is primarily, essentially lawful except that is declared unlawful, but yet we experience the opposite. The second difference that I want to raise between the Islam of the priests and the Islam of the Quran and of rationality, of using the rational mind, is my reading of the hadiths is, when I read these books and when I experienced that Islam, the ethos, the understanding that emerges is of an Islam that is an obstacle course, an infinite series of endurance tests, self-deprivation, ongoing pain and suffering. That is the Islam I was taught. Is that if it is fun and it is merry and it is happy and it is thrilling and satisfying, it is probably haram. Everything to do with Islam has to be an endurance test, self-deprivation, ongoing pain and suffering, and you will experience paradise in the year after. Now that contrasts with the ethos or the idea that emerges from the pages of the Quran, where the Quran says Islam is a state of harmony and bliss based on avoiding self-destructive and socially destructive practices. Temporary discomfort and pain are only required to overthrow those who impose harm and destruction, the oppressors. So that pain and suffering, that sabr, that endurance, is not nonsensical, but that endurance, that pain, that suffering, that hardship is in the process of overthrowing those who would act in a harmful way to yourself or to society in general. Islam by nature, the fundamental departure point is not a system of hardship, difficulty, endurance, and deprivation. It is a system of harmony, bliss, and peace. But it requires a temporary effort, a temporary process of discomfort, pain, and sacrifice to establish that harmony. And that is the second main difference between the two visions. Let's go to the third one. The stories in the Hadith, according to the priests, are intended to extract new regulations to regulate and control people's lives. Whereas the stories in the Holy Book, in the Qur'an, are intended to bolster our resolve to resist oppressors and establish harmony and bliss. So, for example, a story by Abu Huraira in a Hadith book, would speak about the dangers of dogs, and then that would lead to a regulation around dogs. Whereas in the Quran there would be a story about dogs and youth in a cave in order to strengthen our iman and to strengthen our resolve. So the two visions or the two worldviews completely contrast on why these stories are being set out. Fourth difference. The grand goal in the priestly Islam is to comply with the regulations promulgated by holy men and to wait for joy to come in the life hereafter. So you don't have much of a life in this world, but the real joy comes in the life hereafter. Your job here is to obey and comply with the regulations promulgated by holy men. Under the Islam of the Quran, the grand goal is to gain nearness to God, to Allah, to observe His expressed will, and to build a successful earthly life and a success in the life hereafter. So the building of a successful, happy, blissful, harmonious life in this world is very, very much a part of the grand goal. Number 5. Respect for authority, even if unjust, is a requirement of the priests. And if you look at some of the hadith, some of the fiqh positions, then an unjust authority does not necessitate a resistance and an uprising. In fact, according to the Shafi'i madhab, we have to comply or succumb to an authority even if unjust. And that is clearly written in the books of fiqh. Whereas in the Qur'an's Islam, we must seek war and martyrdom against an unjust authority. An authority that is killing unjustly, that is exiling people, kicking them out from their homes. We should be in a state of war and resistance against such an authority. There could be no peaceful coexistence. Number 6, the text, the words in the books do not have to make sense and may contain contradictions. In fact, why are there madhahib? Is because one madhab sees a ruling in a different way to another madhab. They read a hadith in a different way. Whereas there are no madhabs in Qur'an. Qur'an is a singular, unitary understanding, and the only debate could be on a minor issue. But the Qur'an is clear if one does not interfere or bring to bear the hadith on the Qur'an. If the Qur'an is read in its own right, without the interference of hadith, there are no contradictions. And I want to make a quick example. For example, the wasiyah, which is raised in chapter 2, verse 180, I think. It is clearly stipulated that the wasiyah precedes the mirath. But in the hadith, these two are regarded as contradictory. And in the Quran, these two are regarded as complementary. So the Quran, absolutely no contradictions. The hadith and the priests, full of contradictions. Number 7, this endless and infinite number of rules and regulations and books and stories require a middleman to explain God's will. Whereas the limited number of 6,200 verses does not require a middleman. It merely requires a decent intellect and the ability to understand the written word. And then the last one that I want to raise is, it is impossible to accurately to comply with 100. It is impossible to tabulate the infinite number of hadiths accurately, and therefore it is impossible to comply with it 100%. You can only meet a standard that is clearly expressed. You cannot meet a standard that is hazy, that is clouded, that is shrouded in mystery, or that has certain areas that are unclear. You cannot meet that standard clearly. A standard has to be clear and observable. So the Qur'an, with its 6,200 clear and observable verses in a standard language used by millions and millions of people, is clearly accessible. And those, my friends, are the 8 areas that I have found over the years that really brings the contrast between the Islam of the priests and the Islam of the Quran. Now let me just make one final comment, and that is that we are saying that that priests are an impostering class in the whole body of Islam. However, the class and the fraternity that is being rejected and it has been denied from the deen is the philosopher leader, the religious leader, the pious imam. And that, my dear friends, I want to close with. When I say that there is no priesthood in Islam, I'm not saying that there is no such thing as the pious leader. And that is what we require. Instead of the priestly leader, the priestly class, we need a fraternity of pious, righteous leadership. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.